History is full of strange mysteries, but maybe none are as hauntingly beautiful as the story of the woman known across the world, whose face was a complete puzzle. They said she was the most beautiful woman of her age, desired by princes and kings everywhere. But for all her fame and beauty, there was one thing Adia never, ever did: smile. For centuries, men tried to win her happiness, to be the one who could finally break the spell of her sadness. They came with treasure, with armies, and with promises, only to discover that the dark secret behind her silence was not what any of them expected. It was a lesson, hidden in plain sight, that would change their world forever. This is the story of Adia, the bride who never smiled, and the deep truth she protected with her silence. Kindly take a moment to help grow this channel by hitting the subscribe button now. In a land of green hills and winding rivers, a place where celebrations were as common as the sunrise, lived a young woman named Adia. Her name, in the old language of her people, meant gift, and she truly was one. Poets sang about the perfect balance of her face, about eyes that held the depth of a twilight sky, and a grace so deep she seemed to float instead of walk. From the icy plains in the north to the sunny Spice Islands in the south, her story was whispered in courts and marketplaces. She was Adia, the jewel of her time, but her fame came from a strange truth. For all the life and energy in the world around her, Adia herself was a picture of calm, unbroken sadness. She never laughed at the court jokers. She never showed delight at rare and wonderful gifts. She never smiled. Her parents, the noble rulers of their old lands, were caught between pride and a deep, painful worry. They threw grand feasts, invited the most famous musicians, and dressed her in silks that shone like water. But nothing could move the still surface of her sadness. A daughter so lovely should be full of joy. Her father would sigh to her mother in the quiet of the night. Her sadness is a shadow in our home, her mother would reply, her own heart heavy. It wasn't long before Adia's silence became more famous than her beauty. It became a challenge, a puzzle that the most driven men in the world thought they had to solve. To be the man who made Adia smile, that would be a victory greater than any battle, a reward more valuable than any kingdom. They didn't see her as a person, but as the final prize. And so, they began to arrive. They came on horseback, in grand caravans, and in ships with sails of purple and gold. They came to the valley of green hills and winding rivers, each man sure he held the key to unlocking the bride's happiness. They had no idea they were all about to fail, and that each failure would only show a piece of a puzzle far darker and deeper than any of them guessed. They came to win her smile, but they would leave with a lesson about sadness itself. The first to arrive was a prince from the eastern sands named Malak, a man so rich, it was said, he paved his kingdom's roads with silver, just to quiet the noise of passing carts. He believed anything in the world could be bought, including happiness. His caravan stretched for miles, a shining snake of camels loaded with chests of gold, diamonds the size of a man's fist, and silks so fine they were almost invisible until they caught the light. He walked into the great hall, his servants laying a carpet of woven gold thread before him. "Lady Adia," he announced, his voice loud with pride, "I have come not to court you, but to buy your joy. Name your price. 100 chests of gold, 1,000, a palace of polished jade with rivers of milk and honey. I'll build it. There is no treasure I can't get, no comfort I can't provide. Let your smile be my proof." He gestured, and his servants opened a chest. A river of jewels, emeralds, rubies, sapphires, poured onto the floor in a bright, cold shine. The court gasped. It was a fortune that could fund empires. Adia looked at the glittering pile. She looked at the proud, waiting face of the prince. And then she looked past him, her eyes fixed on a place no one else could see. She gave a single tiny shake of her head. No words, no emotion, just a silent, firm refusal. Prince Malak was shocked, then angry. He'd never been denied anything in his life. He stormed out, his treasures suddenly looking cheap and useless. On the cold stone floor, he had just learned the first part of the secret: joy has no price. The prince's gold had failed, but the next suitor thought he had a much stronger weapon: laughter itself. He was Jean-Luc, the most famous joker in the Western kingdoms. People said his jokes were so sharp, he once made a stone gargoyle crack a smile. Kings and queens paid fortunes for him to perform for just one evening. He arrived not with wealth, but with a group of acrobats, singers, and comedians, promising to blow away Adia's sadness with a festival of pure, wild joy. For 3 days and 3 nights, the castle grounds turned into a carnival. Jean-Luc juggled fire, told stories that made the guards fall over laughing, and staged funny plays mocking the strict nobles of the court with perfect, biting humor. The whole household was in tears from laughter. On the final day, for his big ending, he approached Adia, who sat on a throne like an island of calm in a sea of noise. "My lady," he said, taking a dramatic bow, "I have made warriors weep with laughter and kings snort wine through their noses. Surely, I can bring just a spark of a smile to your face." He then performed his masterpiece, a silent comedy about a man trying to catch a playful sunbeam. He tumbled, he tripped, he pretended frustration and surprise. He was a storm of physical comedy, a true master. The court roared, tears of laughter pouring down their faces. Finally, exhausted and covered in sweat, he struck a final silly pose and looked at Adia, his face bright, certain he had won. But Adia's expression hadn't moved. She had watched his whole performance with quiet, patient attention, but there was no hint of amusement in her eyes, no twitch at the corner of her lips. She simply sat, her stillness a gentle rejection of his wild energy. Jean-Luc's smile faded. For the first time, his jokes had failed completely. Not because they weren't funny, but because the person he aimed them at simply didn't want to laugh. He packed up his group and left in the night, humbled and unsure. He'd learned the second part of the secret. Happiness can't be pushed on someone. What do you think is the real reason Adia won't smile? Is it a lost love, a terrible curse, or something else entirely? Let me know your guess in the comments below. The third suitor was a very different kind of man. He was Bjorn, the great warrior from the north, who had built a kingdom out of ice and rock with his own hands. He didn't bring gold or jokes. He brought his reputation, believing that power and glory were the strongest temptations. He stood before Adia, not in the hall, but in the castle courtyard. He was a giant of a man, wearing black iron and wolf skins. His voice sounded like a glacier's grinding together. "Adia," he boomed, "I offer you no trinkets or tricks. I offer you strength, victory. Marry me, and my armies will be your armies. My enemies will be your enemies. No one will ever dare to cause you sadness again. Your safety will be perfect, your power unmatched. Fear is the root of sadness. I will make you the most feared woman in the world, and in that power you will find joy." To show his point, he performed great feats of strength. He wrestled his champion fighter and threw him to the ground. He smashed a granite boulder with one blow from his warhammer. He shot an arrow through an apple on a servant's head from 100 paces, then shot a second arrow that split the first in two. He was a show of raw, wild power, a force of nature. When he was done, he stood breathing heavily, chest full of pride. and looked to Adia for her praise. She met his gaze, and for the first time, something moved in her eyes. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't admiration. It was pity. She saw a man who believed the only way to deal with the world was through force. A man who thought her heart could be taken like a rebellious city. Without a word, she stood up and walked back into the castle, leaving the great warrior standing alone in the courtyard with his hammer and his strength both completely useless. Beyond, the conqueror had been defeated by a single, silent look. And it learned the third part of the secret. You can't order the heart. The failures of the prince, the joker, and the warrior became famous stories. The mystery of Adia only grew. Suitors still came, but they were fewer now, and more careful. It seemed no earthly force, not wealth, not laughter, not power, could move her. The world began to accept her as she was, a beautiful, timeless mystery. Then, one day, a young man named Kofi arrived in the village. He wasn't a prince, a joker, or a warrior. He was a simple woodcarver from a distant land who had heard the stories. But unlike the others, he wasn't drawn by the challenge or the glory. He was drawn by a quiet, deep curiosity. He didn't want to make her smile. He wanted to understand why she didn't. Kofi wasn't rich, or strong, or famously funny. His only remarkable traits were his skilled hands and his kind, observant eyes. He didn't announce himself at the castle or demand an audience. Instead, he took a small room at the village inn and simply began to live. He didn't try to approach Adia. He just watched and he listened. He spent his days in the village square, carving small wooden animals for the children. He fixed a broken fence for an elderly widow. He helped a farmer whose cart lost a wheel. He offered his help quietly and expected nothing in return. He spoke to the village elders, not asking about Adia, but about the history of the land. He listened to their stories, their songs, and their sorrows. He learned the names of their ancestors and where their forgotten shrines were. He started to feel the rhythm of the place, the gentle flow of its shared memory. The villagers, at first unsure of the stranger, grew to love him. They saw his kindness was real. The children ran to him, their laughter ringing as he told them simple stories and gave them his wooden carvings. A bird with open wings, a leaping fish, a sleeping cat. From her window, or during her silent walks by the river, Adia started to notice him. She saw how easy he was with the children. She saw the respect in the elders' eyes when they spoke to him. She saw him not as a suitor trying to impress her, but as a man caring for the soul of her community. He wasn't creating a loud show of joy. He was growing it, little by little, in the hearts of others. He wasn't trying to fill a silence. He was listening to what the silence meant. And as he lived and worked and listened, Kofi began to discover the dark secret. It wasn't a story anyone told him directly. It was a ghost that rested quietly in their shared memory. A wound so deep it had never healed. The secret was a silence within the silence. Years ago, before Adia was born, a terrible fire had swept through the valley during a harvest festival. Blown by a cruel wind, it moved faster than anyone could run. The main village was saved, but the far farm homes, where many of the youngest families lived, were completely destroyed. In a single, horrific afternoon, an entire group of children was lost. Nearly every family lost a son, a daughter, a grandchild, a niece, or a nephew. The grief was so heavy, so shocking, that it broke the spirit of the land. In the days that followed, the community made a quiet, unspoken promise. There would be no more dancing at harvest time. The children's favorite songs would not be sung. Their names were never spoken aloud because the pain of their memory was too strong. The village had survived, but it silenced its own joy as a memorial to the dead. They wrapped their community in a blanket of quiet, practical grief. Adia was the first child born in the village after the fire. She was born into this world of silent sadness. She grew up among adults who loved her, but who had forgotten how to show true, free joy. She never heard sudden communal laughter. She never saw the elders dance. Her name, Adia, the gift, was a prayer for renewal, but she was a gift placed in a house of mourning. Her silence was not her own. It was something she inherited. She was the living symbol of the village's unspoken grief. She couldn't smile because she was raised in a land where joy felt like a betrayal of the dead. Her sadness wasn't a choice. It was a tribute. This was her dark secret. Not some evil she was hiding, but a deep sorrow she was honoring. Kofi understood. He realized that all the suitors had failed because they had tried to fight her sadness. They treated it like a sickness to be cured or an enemy to be defeated. They never once thought to ask if her sadness had meaning. They never considered that it might be something sacred. He knew then what he had to do. It was not his job to make her smile. It was his job to show her, and the entire village, that it was finally okay to do so. One bright afternoon, Kofi gathered all the children of the village, the new generation born after the fire. He led them not to the castle, but to a meadow overlooking the old abandoned farmhomes. He had spent weeks carving new toys, not just animals, but spinning tops and wooden flutes. He began to play with them, starting a game of chase, teaching them a silly forgotten song. At first the children were unsure. Their play had always been a quiet, careful thing. But Kofi's joy was gentle and spreading. Soon they were screaming with laughter, their bright, clear voices flowing down the hill. The elders and other villagers heard the noise. One by one, they came out of their homes, pulled by the unfamiliar sound of loud, free childhood joy. They saw their children playing, truly playing, for the first time. Adia was walking by the river when she heard it. The sound of real laughter, not pushed or polite, but the pure, clean laughter of children. She followed the sound to the meadow. She saw Kofi in the middle of the happy chaos, his face bright with warmth. But then, she saw something else. She saw the elders of the village standing at the edge of the field, and they were crying. But they were also smiling. Through their tears, they were smiling. They were watching their children, and they were remembering the children they had lost. But for the first time, the memory wasn't just pain. The new laughter wasn't covering the old silence. It was healing it. It was giving them permission to be happy again, to honor the past without being trapped by it. Kofi caught her eye from across the meadow. He didn't call to her or make a big gesture. He simply gave her a small, knowing nod and smiled. A smile that asked for nothing in return. And as she watched the children play, saw the elders' tear-streaked smiles, and felt the warmth of Kofi's quiet understanding, Adia felt something move inside her. A lightness. The heavy blanket of inherited grief she had carried her whole life began to fall away. And then, slowly, like the first ray of sun after a long, dark winter, Adia smiled. It wasn't a wide grin. It was a small, soft, heartbreakingly beautiful smile. It was a smile of release, of gratitude, and of hope. It was a smile that accepted all the sorrow of the past and welcomed the promise of the future. It was the most powerful expression of joy the land had ever seen, because it was a joy that had been earned through understanding. In the days that followed, Adia found herself drawn to Kofi in a way she had never expected. They began to walk together through the village, talking softly beneath the shade of ancient trees. Kofi showed her the small joys she had never allowed herself to notice. The feel of warm clay between her fingers, the music hidden in the river's gentle flow, the comfort of simply sitting beside someone who expected nothing from her. Their conversations were light at first, then deeper, weaving threads of trust between them. Soon, laughter, real laughter, began to return to Adia's life. Sometimes, it was a quiet giggle when Kofi carved a wooden bird that looked nothing like a bird at all. Other times, it was full, unrestrained laughter when he pretended he could dance and failed miserably, tripping over his own feet until even the elders chuckled. They cooked together, listened to stories from the villagers, and played with the children in the meadow. For the first time, Adia lived days that were not defined by sorrow, but by simple, gentle companionship. Their friendship grew into a bond the village could feel, a steady, glowing warmth that spread as naturally as sunlight. Kofi never tried to claim her heart. He walked beside her and let it open on its own. And day by day, as trust deepened and joy blossomed, Adia realized that her smile had not been the end of her healing. It had only been the beginning. Kofi and Adia were married, not because he had won a prize, but because he had listened. He didn't silence her sorrow, he shared it. Their union wasn't the start of a story, but the healing of one. The tale of the bride who never smiled became a legend, but its meaning changed forever. It was no longer a story about defeating a woman's sadness, but about having the courage to understand it. It reminds us that some of the deepest pains are carried quietly, and that true connection doesn't come from trying to fix someone's sorrow, but from creating a safe place where they can finally set it down. What are the silent sorrows we carry for our own families or communities? And who are the people who, through quiet kindness, give us permission to heal? Thank you for watching.